History is repeating in gold. In 1939, the world stood on the edge of collapse. Currencies were failing. Empires were cracking. And in vaults beneath London, Paris, Berlin, and New York, gold bars vanished from circulation. Nations were hoarding it, quietly, urgently, as if they could sense the storm coming. They were right. Within months, the global economy imploded, alliances shattered, and the world entered the deadliest war in history. Gold wasn't an investment back then. It was a lifeboat. Now, in 2025, the same pattern is repeating. The world's central banks, from China to Russia, from Turkey to Poland, are buying gold at the fastest pace since that fateful year, 1939. They're dumping U.S. Treasuries. They're cutting dependence on the dollar. And they're quietly moving their reserves out of Western vaults, back home. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's a signal, a whisper from history saying, something big is coming. The International Monetary Fund calls it a diversification strategy. Economists label it de-dollarization. But behind the polished words and economic jargon lies something far older, far more primal: fear. Fear that the system we've built since 1945, the dollar system, the trust system, is starting to crack. For centuries, gold has been humanity's final insurance policy. And when nations start hoarding it, it's never about profit. It's about survival. In 1939, they called it preparation. In 2025, they call it reserve management. Different names, same story. The question is, what do they see coming this time? Because history doesn't repeat itself by accident. It warns. And right now, that warning is glittering in gold. The modern gold rush. In the quiet corridors of global finance, a silent race is underway. While headlines obsess over elections, wars, and stock markets, the real story is unfolding underground, in the vaults of nations. According to the World Gold Council, central banks bought more than 1,000 tons of gold in 2024 alone, the highest level in over 70 years. That's not retail investors, not hedge funds, that's governments. The very institutions that print money are now exchanging that paper for something they can't print: gold. China has been the most aggressive. Month after month, it reports new purchases, swelling its reserves to record highs. But not all of them are reported. Independent analysts believe Beijing is secretly buying even more through off-the-books channels, the kind used before major monetary shifts. Russia, under sanctions and cut from the Western financial system, has done the same. Its central bank now holds one of the world's largest gold reserves, a buffer against the weaponization of the US dollar. Turkey, India, Poland, Hungary, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all have joined the rush. Even nations in Africa and the Middle East, from Egypt to Saudi Arabia, are quietly building stockpiles. Something is happening. Something the mainstream refuses to say out loud. Because for central banks, gold isn't a speculative asset. It's a vote of no confidence in the global system itself. Why would nations abandon the dollar, the world's reserve currency, after 70 years of dominance? Why now, when markets still appear strong and inflation seems tamed? The answer lies in a simple truth. When trust in money begins to erode, power shifts from paper to metal. And right now that shift is accelerating. Every purchase, every shipment, every ton of gold moved from New York or London to Beijing or Moscow is a message written in silence. They're preparing for something. But what exactly are they preparing for? To understand, we have to go back to a decade when the world looked eerily similar to ours. A time when currencies collapsed, empires trembled, and nations turned to gold as their last defense. Let's go back to the 1930s, and the moment history began to repeat itself. The 1930s, when gold became survival. The story begins nearly a century ago. The 1930s were supposed to be a decade of recovery after the Roaring '20s, a time of optimism, innovation, and economic boom. But behind the glitter, the foundation was cracking. In 1929, the global stock market imploded. Banks failed. Factories closed. Millions lost their savings overnight. The Great Depression had begun, not just in America, but across the entire world. As the economy collapsed, governments scrambled to stop the bleeding. They printed money. They cut interest rates. They promised stability. But each desperate move only deepened the mistrust. Currencies began to die, one by one. In Britain, the pound sterling, once the world's anchor, was abandoned from the gold standard in 1931. Japan followed. Then the Scandinavian countries. By 1933, even the United States, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, confiscated private gold and devalued the dollar. The promise that a paper dollar could be exchanged for gold was broken. Faith in money itself began to fade. The world entered a period of currency wars, competitive devaluations, secret trade deals, and collapsing exchange rates. Each nation tried to save its economy by sacrificing its currency. But there's a limit to how many times you can devalue trust. And as confidence in paper vanished, the rush toward physical gold began. Central banks across Europe moved their reserves out of vulnerable capitals and into secret locations, caves, bunkers, underground vaults. France and Belgium shipped gold to North America. Poland smuggled its entire national reserve across multiple countries to keep it out of Nazi hands. It wasn't about profit. It was about survival. In the years that followed, gold became power. Whoever had it could rebuild when the world fell apart. Whoever didn't disappeared from history. The parallels to our world today are haunting. In the 1930s, trust in global trade collapsed. Inflation soared. Currencies weakened. Populism and nationalism spread like wildfire. And within a decade, war redrew the map of civilization. Back then, the signal was gold. It was the barometer of fear and the measure of sovereignty. Now, nearly a century later, that same signal is flashing again. Only this time, the stage isn't Europe. It's global. And the empire in question isn't British. It's American. As the world quietly shifts from the dollar to gold, we're watching the same prelude play out, just with new actors and a new script. History isn't repeating. It's warning. The 2020s. The quiet death of the dollar order. Fast forward to the 2020s, a world once united under a single financial language, the US dollar. For nearly 8 decades, it has been the lifeblood of global trade, the weapon of diplomacy, and the foundation of American power. But now, that foundation is showing cracks. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, something unprecedented happened. Western powers froze over 300 billion of Russian foreign reserves, simply with the stroke of a pen. That move sent a silent shockwave through the world's central banks. For the first time, nations realized that their money wasn't really theirs if it was held in US dollars or in Western-controlled institutions. From Beijing to Riyadh, from New Delhi to Brasilia, policymakers asked the same question. If it could happen to Russia, could it happen to us? And that's when the pivot began. China accelerated its long-term plan, reducing exposure to US Treasuries and buying gold in record quantities. Its foreign reserves, once stacked with American debt, are being quietly reshaped into something tangible, untouchable, and immune to sanctions. Russia doubled down, selling energy for gold or local currencies instead of dollars. Turkey, India, and even Saudi Arabia, longtime allies of the West, began exploring trade deals in yuan, rupees, or gold-backed settlements. This isn't speculation. It's de-dollarization, the largest monetary realignment in modern history. For decades, the world's faith in the dollar was built on 3 pillars: stability, security, and trust. But stability cracked with inflation, security cracked with sanctions, and trust, the most fragile pillar of all, is now fading. At the same time, debt in the United States has exploded past $35 trillion. Interest payments alone exceed military spending. To foreign governments, that's not strength. It's vulnerability. So they're hedging. Not with derivatives, not with crypto, but with gold. The one asset that has never defaulted, never been hacked, and never needed a central bank's permission to exist. Every bar of gold moved from London to Shanghai, every ton repatriated from New York to Warsaw, is a vote against the current system. And the message is clear. The dollar's reign is ending, slowly, quietly, and deliberately. It's no coincidence that this rush toward gold mirrors the same global anxiety of the 1930s. The names have changed. The fear has not. Back then, nations feared the collapse of empires. Now, they fear the collapse of the dollar empire itself. And as history shows, when trust in money dies, a new system is always born from its ashes. Gold as control and sovereignty. To most people, gold is just a shiny metal, a relic of the past, something your grandparents might have kept in a drawer or a wedding ring. But to those who understand power, real power, gold is something far greater. It is control. It is sovereignty. And in times of crisis, it becomes the only form of money that doesn't lie. When a central bank buys gold, it's not chasing profit. It's securing freedom. Freedom from the invisible web of dependence that comes with paper currencies, digital systems, and international debt. The United States built its global dominance on this web. After World War II, at Bretton Woods, every major currency was tied to the dollar, and the dollar was tied to gold. For decades, the world trusted that link. But in 1971, President Richard Nixon severed it, closing the gold window and ending the gold standard once and for all. From that moment, money became pure faith, backed not by metal, but by promises. The US could print endlessly, and the world would still accept its currency. As long as that faith held, the system worked. But faith is fragile, and when the world starts questioning whether those promises can still be kept, gold returns. Gold doesn't need a signature. It doesn't rely on swift networks or central bank policies. It doesn't vanish in a cyber attack or freeze under sanctions. It exists, it holds weight, and it answers to no one. That's why nations are moving it back home. Germany repatriated hundreds of tons from New York and Paris. Hungary brought back all its reserves in secret. Poland expanded its underground vaults. And China, whose total holdings are still a state secret, is building a network of vaults across Asia, protected, fortified, and out of reach from Western institutions. They're not preparing for the next quarter. They're preparing for the next era. In every major monetary reset, from 1939 to 1971 to 2008, one truth has remained unchanged. The nations that control gold control the future. Because gold doesn't just preserve wealth, it anchors power. When currencies collapse, when debt implodes, when systems reset, the ones holding gold don't beg for rescue. They dictate the terms of the new order. This is the motive behind the modern gold rush. Not profit, not nostalgia, but positioning. Every ton of gold purchased today is a brick in the foundation of the world that will exist after the current system fails. And make no mistake, they believe that failure is coming, sooner than most think. The birth of a new monetary system. Every few generations, the world rewrites its financial code. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in whispers, in meetings behind closed doors, in quiet policy shifts that no one notices until it's too late. We are living in one of those moments. The signs are everywhere, but only visible to those who remember history. The rise of BRICS, the expansion of alternative payment systems, the trade in local currencies, and the talk of gold-backed settlements. These are not random experiments. They are fragments of a new architecture being assembled piece by piece. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, the United States emerged from World War II as the world's creditor. Its economy was untouched, its gold reserves unmatched. America controlled 2/3 of the world's monetary gold, and so the dollar became the anchor of the post-war system. Today, that dynamic has reversed. The United States is the world's largest debtor, and the nations holding that debt, China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, are losing faith in its value. Once faith erodes, power follows. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has grown beyond symbolism. Together, they represent over 40% of the global population and a quarter of the world's GDP. They are no longer asking for a seat at the table. They are building a new one. In 2023, discussions began about a gold-linked BRICS currency, a trade settlement system designed to bypass the dollar entirely. Skeptics laughed, but history suggests they shouldn't. Because every global reset, from the collapse of the British pound to the rise of the dollar, started exactly this way. Small nations trying to escape the gravity of an empire in decline. Gold is the bridge between the old world and the new one. It is the only asset that can unify distrustful nations under a single, neutral foundation. You don't need to trust another country's central bank. You just need to trust the metal. And so, a quiet coalition is forming. Russia sells oil for gold-linked payments. China tests cross-border digital currency networks backed by reserves. Even countries once firmly aligned with Washington, like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, are hedging their bets, joining BRICS dialogues, and diversifying their reserves. This isn't about abandoning the West. It's about surviving what comes after it. Because beneath all the economics, beneath all the politics, lies a truth as old as civilization itself. Every empire ends when its money dies. Rome's silver denarius, Spain's gold doubloons, Britain's pound sterling, and now, perhaps, the dollar. But in every collapse, gold survives. It waits patiently for the next empire to rebuild around it. That's why the central banks of the world are buying gold like it's 1939. Not to make a profit, not to diversify, but to prepare for the reset. A world where digital currencies, geopolitical fractures, and the ghosts of inflation will demand something real to anchor trust again. And when that reset comes, the nations holding gold won't just endure the storm. They'll own the dawn that follows.